not just allies, but advancers to continue to do that work.
Fred, I want to ask you the question that I posed to Dr. Miller and Commissioner Jones earlier. How did you show up in the Capital Region as a Black professional?
One, I think it's critical. I think this area could use more and more role models and more images of what can be and what needs to be. I think it's critical that we do that. I'm in Troy most of the time. I do some work in Albany. And showing up is showing up with power, showing up with knowledge, showing up to let people know that, you know, I have something not only to say, but I have something I want them to do. So, you know, I'm an old timer, been around here a long time. So there's several groups in Troy that I'm very involved in, a couple that I have started, bringing the community together and letting us together talk about problems in Troy and how we're going to make things better. And so showing up is really saying to people, we got to make things different, that you got to acknowledge kind of me and who I am and my role in that community and in organizations, and that there's an expectation that you're going to treat me with the highest level of respect. If not, you're not going to have a very good day. And I expect you to treat everybody else in the room with a high level of respect.
You know, you mentioned that you're an old timer. You've been doing this work since 1972, and your organization last year celebrated its 50th year, its 50th anniversary. Why are you dedicating your life to this work? And please elaborate a little bit about the work.
So we're a culture change firm. We're a management consulting firm. We're located here in Troy. Like you said, we've been around 50 years. And we work with mainly large corporations. So we work with Mobil and DuPont, and we've worked with Apple and Oracle. We've worked with Merck. We're working with one of the organizations now involved in the vaccine. So we have been working with large organizations because when in the old days, when I came out of college, the corporate America was really more white than it is now. And, you know, I started in corporations in the 60s, and corporate America was very white, and we came in as management trainees. I was probably in that third group of African Americans that come in not to be janitors or elevator operators or cooks, but to be managers in the organization. And so, you know, we've been involved with organizations kind of bringing about that kind of change. And I do it for a lot of reasons. One, I do it to give back. It's my life energy. I've dedicated my life to it. I never thought I was dedicating my life to it when I started. I was like, okay, this thing around Blacks and whites and other people are different. It's just stupid. It's stupid to have this be a difference that makes a difference. And if we bring the light of day to it, if people see it and understand it, things will change. So as naive as I was in my 20s, I thought change was going to happen quickly because it makes no sense. It makes no sense because I have dark skin that I have a whole different experience than somebody with white skin. Makes no sense. And so I did not start off dedicating my life to it, but once I got involved, the needs kept appearing and I wanted to keep going. So, and then realizing organizations are calling us because they realize they haven't done enough, that there's more work to be done on this effort. One of our colleagues has talked about this being the third Reconstruction. The first Reconstruction being during slavery, when Lincoln freed some of the slaves, mainly in slave states. And then the second Reconstruction being in the 60s. And now we're in the third Reconstruction. I really believe that. I believe this thing that's happening now, related to people of color, especially related to African Americans, is real and has sustainability. That doesn't mean a Reconstruction takes a year or 2 years, may take 10 years. But we're in a very, very, very critical spot. So organizations are feeling pressure. They're feeling pressure from employees, which is great. Often people would be, I'm glad I got a job. That's gone now. I have an expectation about this organization. They're feeling pressure from the public. They're feeling pressure. NASDAQ on the stock exchange just said, I expect diversity in all the companies that are on the NASDAQ. If you don't have it, tell us why. And if you do have it, I expect to see diversity at your board and in other places. So the stakes have gotten high. This is not a thing that's going to go away. This is permanent. This is that third Reconstruction. People, organizations know they have work to do, and people are this next generation is not taking oh, that's the way it is for an answer. This next
That's right.
generation is saying, I'm calling the question, and if you don't do something, I'm not going to support you. I'm not out here. I'd rather not have whatever product or service you have than to deal with an organization that I see as racist.
Yeah. So Fred, and Dr. Miller and Commissioner Jones, you each represent a different sector. We have corporate, we have education, and we have government. Yet, it seems as if from our conversation, your experience is the same. So I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about your experience as a Black professional. Talk, if you can, a little bit about your journey from entry level to executive level, because all of you are executives. Talk a little bit about that. If I can give you about 2 minutes each, just talk a little bit about that experience, what it was like, and yeah, we'll leave it there and then I'll follow up.
I guess I'll start. So, just taking the journey, I grew up in Rochester, New York, one of the most impoverished cities in the country, highest murder rates per capita in New York State. And I grew up in the projects there, and I just knew I wanted something a little bit different. And so I saw leadership often, and leadership wasn't doing what I felt was best for kids. They seemed like they were doing more of what's best for themselves. So I decided to get involved. And even throughout that journey, and the quick version of this story is that I faced a lot of adversity. There were times where I was a candidate for a job, and I would outdo maybe 300 candidates, be told that I had the job, and then later find out that a white woman was put in place for that position. So I've experienced that throughout the time. I've experienced quite often where people openly expressed that I wasn't smart enough, or I wasn't good enough, or because I was a former athlete, that I was a dumb jock because I wasn't, what they thought I should be able to be. And then even transforming and coming here. Now, God bless the team that I have here. We do amazing work. So it's a team effort, but we produce a 95% graduation rate, 100% acceptance to college, and almost up to 15 million scholarship money yearly. But however, behind the scenes, the struggles and fights that I have to still face through that, especially with dealing with certain staff members and the microaggressions and some of the racial innuendos that you deal with are heavy. And they're heavy from the perspective of, I've heard that if he was a white man, I would listen to him. I'm heard because, I'm biracial, that and I identify as a Black man, that because I don't identify as being white, and I don't like my mother, and that they're not going to listen to me because of that. I've heard that, he's not going to hire a white person, only a Black person will get the job, when we have processes in place for the most qualified person to receive the job. I've heard all kinds of things to where it's daily struggles, where you're dealing with those things personally, but then you're dealing with them professionally. And, I've had someone walk into the main office and say to a Black woman, and in front of me say, oh, your hair looks nice. Oh, that's not your hair. That must be a wig. And like something from the extent of just having the right and the privilege to be able to say something profound to this woman who had her hair beautifully done, and not understand the microaggression behind that, to later find out that the person came from a systemically racist background and needs to continue to work to address and heal. But those are some of the things that we face daily within this educational sector, and trying to transform it and make sure that we fight that, but also fight the woes that happen upon our kids.
Thank you. Commissioner Jones?
So I'm from Syracuse, New York originally. Similar to Dr. Miller, I know what it's like to eat a Serb sandwich. And if you've ever had a Serb sandwich, you know what that feeling is. But I was raised by a single mother, and my family has history in the civil rights movement. So history and Black history has been a part of my life since the beginning. However, my mother put me in education programs since the 6th grade. I was a STEP student, I was an EOP student, I was an LPP student, I was an upward bound student. And so she's trained me because my circumstances, I wouldn't have got here without that extra training, that tutelage. On top of that, I've had mentors. I've had a village of people. Dr. Carson Carr comes to mind, that many of you may know, in Albany, and Dr. Lee McElroy that helped me understand my true value. When I came to Albany, I literally had PTSD. I have lost several uncles to street violence. I have lost my best friend. I've lost cousins. I've seen people murdered right in front of me. And so when you live with that and you bring that, that's not something that escapes you. However, I was also taught that I didn't have the complexion for protection. And that is a quote by Dick Gregory, who, when you say that, you have to know that as a Black person, you have to come prepared, and you have to, more importantly, as a Black male, speak your truth. And what I mean by that is when you get in the room, not shy down. At the same time, make sure that you are representing. For me, I do this work because it's a purpose. It's not something like Mr. Miller said. This is not something that I dreamed of, but it's something that called me. And so I do this to carry on the traditions that my uncles gave to me, that, you know, Dr. Carr and all the different people who helped me get along my way did for me. But I've also had people take chances. You know, for example, the mayor took a chance on me to be a 30-year-old commissioner, making me the youngest commissioner in the city of Albany, the second of the city of the United States. That was a chance. That was something that she saw value in me. However, I'm at a point right now where if I don't use my platform and my status, whatever that may be, to bring up other Black men and other Black people, as Dr. Martin Luther King say, then I'm not really doing anything. And so that's where my push is. I've experienced privilege as an athlete, like Dr. Miller talked about. I was a quarterback, and so there's special privileges that you get as a quarterback. And then being a D1 track and field athlete at the University of Albany, there's advantages that you get, but there's also that marginalization when you realize that, you know, you're not going to be the person that's going to be welcome in the room with open arms, or you're not going to get the first look at your resume just because you're an athlete, right? You have to do more than that. And so I've tried, you know, through my work, and luckily I have a village of people, like Dr. Miller said, that support me to actually help me raise the game, but at the same time, actually help us achieve the things we want to achieve. Because as Mr. Miller said, this generation, particularly the young people, they have the internet. I didn't have the internet just readily available to me. So the information is there. And at the same time, the power to execute on that information is also there. So that's what I would say about myself.
I appreciate what the other two panelists said. And appreciate the work you're doing. So thank you for that. Born and raised in Philadelphia, the inner city of Philadelphia, kind of a lower middle class family. But it was wonderful being in Philadelphia. It was alive. It was the 60s. Lots of things were happening in Philadelphia. Ended up going to a historically Black college, Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, and loved it. It was a total Black immersion experience. And it was in the 60s. So people were doing sit-ins. People were, you know, we had, you know, professors that were James Farmer, was a professor. Stokely Carmichael, his original name was one of my professors. I mean, it was an incredible time, and it helped me become aware of my Blackness. Now, I was aware of it already being in the city and going to the schools in Philadelphia, but it gave me a sense of, and we can do something about this, and you can do something about this. And I think my whole class ended up being committed to social change. And then I left after college. I went to work for an insurance company now called Cigna, then called Connecticut General. And one of the things that we noticed, is that there were about probably 8 or 9 of us who came in at the same time as Black kind of management trainees. And we started talking about our performance ratings. And we realized that all our ratings were low. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am, so maybe I got a low rating. But this guy right here, this Black guy right here, went to Wharton and came out near the top of his class. How come his rating isn't higher? And I know if I look at him compared to my white counterpart, he's outperforming my white counterpart, but yet his rating is low. And then we start putting pressure on the organization to do something, and to start doing stuff around diversity before the word diversity was there. And I started getting involved in that work and training and education, and got me involved in this field. The other thing I would say is that, you know, in the 80s, 90s, I would often be the first Black person ever to come into some of the senior leaders' office. I remember senior leaders saying, I've never had a Black person come in here other than the cleaning people. And so all of a sudden they had to do a mind shift. They didn't have Black people as peers, or Black people as consultants, or Blacks as being in positions of authority, or even coaching or counseling them. And so I had to deal with that a lot and several times. One time I was in a workshop, and as I talk now, I modulate my voice, go up and down. And I was with a group of white leaders, and they were in a corner, and they came out and said, Fred, we don't think you like us. Because when they talk, they would say, this is how we see it, and it's been a hard day. And by the way, my dog died today. And also, I sent some flowers to a friend of mine. They didn't modulate their voices at all. They just talked in a monotone. And I'm like jumping up and down, moving my hands, all this stuff. And they were like, you must be mad. I'm like, no.
Mm-hmm.
You know what this is? This is called passion. Look it up in the dictionary. That's what some people have, passion. But that was how narrow the bandwidth was about behavior, that they wanted you to be very monotone, don't get excited, be and stay in line. And so that was a big shift for them to understand that there's variation out here in the world. I think for now, my age helps, being an old guy helps. I think my experience, long. I've been in this area for 50 years in the capital region. So but mainly in the Detroit area, but in my work, I've been all over the world. I've worked in Singapore, China, Japan, the Netherlands, et cetera. A lot of that we did with Merck Pharmaceutical Company and all their manufacturing facilities, and then with other clients in Germany, et cetera. The thing that I demand is that they treat this consulting firm like they would treat the white consulting firms. And don't let them slip into paying me less. So there's 30 people in this consulting firm, 20 consultants and 10 of us who work out of the Troy office here. And I represent them. And I demand that clients treat us fairly and treat us with respect as we're doing it. So the same thing they would give McKinsey or one of the other large consulting firms, I expect that same treatment and nothing less. And so some of it's pushing, some of it's demanding, and some of it's showing up with confidence and knowing that I can deliver what they need, I can help them be better, and I probably can do that better than most people.
Yolanda, that's so interesting that Mr. Miller brings that up, because so often the Black culture is used to promote products, right? The way we use our hands and we dance, and right. But then when you're in the room and you use the same mannerisms or the same behaviors that is promoted, you get laughed out of the room. And I just ask people to have the same approach you do to investing. You can say diversification and asset allocation is important. Have the same, mindset.
I appreciate you. I want to make the bridge. This is the Bridge Network, and I want to make the bridge, and I want to invite. First, I want to thank you. Thank you, the three of you, for sharing your stories. And I hope our audience, for those of you who may have missed my instruction earlier, I asked you to grab a piece of paper and write down a column, 2 columns, one at the top that says experience and one that says you've never experienced. And I hope you took notes about the experiences that our panelists have had and made note whether you have experienced or not experienced it. So thank you. Now we're going to make the bridge, and we're going to invite our other panelists to join us. Susan, Jeannine, and Richard. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to continue our conversation. And one of the things I want to ask the three of you, how do you show up in the capital region as a professional? What are the expectations of you? And we'll start with Richard.
Well, if you'd asked me this at the beginning of my career, it would have certainly been a different answer. Because at that time, I showed up as opportunistic, really a facade of what I believed to be professionalism, and viewed things through a lens of what was done to me versus what I had done. And it's really only been a matter of a quarter of a century before I could get to a point where I can show up with a sense of vulnerability, acknowledging that I know nothing, and I learn morning to night from the people around me. I show up in terms of authenticity, who I am, who I really am, is a person who does not like putting on a tie. And I have that privilege, and I have that ability to control my destiny by not putting this thing around my neck that feels uncomfortable. But also accountability. I show up accountable for the things that I say, for the impact that they have on others, the impact that they have on myself, and the impact that they ultimately have on my standing within the community.
Thank you. Jeannine?
You know, my answer, similar to Richard, is changing every day as I aspire to learn more and do more and be a better advocate and ally in my daily life for voices that are being silenced and that are not being elevated. And particularly in this conversation, we're referring to the voices of Black women and men. I am an aspiring co-conspirator, in the words of DeQuetta Jones. Every day that I show up, I am waking up and asking myself, how can I help move the needle just a little bit further in the direction of social justice? It has become my passion. Every day I'm listening to amazing intellectual Black men and women speak. And the other day I listened to Cornel West, and he said, it's not just about your career, but it's about your passion. Why do you show up every day? And so I'm now trying to figure out, when I show up in everything I do on LinkedIn, I know a lot of people are hearing me lately, in my gym, in my business, with my children, with everyone I interact with, I'm trying to show up better and better every day as someone who is helping to make this a better, equitable world for everyone. And I'm still trying to figure out how to do that.
Susan?
Backing up what Jeannine and Richard have said, it's a process. It's examining my own beliefs that I always thought I was very socially just. I have my bachelor's in social work. I have my master's in social work. Didn't help me understand what's happening in this DEI, all the issues and racism and systemic racism. So I'm every single day examining my beliefs. I read, I attend programs, I discover local organizations to be involved in. I take positive action. Like Jeannine said, using our voice in social media is huge because it's so prevalent. I attend demonstrations and protests and try to work towards being a positive ally every single day. It's a commitment. I also volunteer and I also donate, and I try to spread that. Word to people in my network and also outside.
So I'm going to ask a question, and this is a conversation. I want us to really talk about this. We're talking about being professionals here in the Capital Region. We're talking about building networks. We're talking about addressing social inequity. How do you respond when you go into a Zoom meeting, because that's where we live these days, and there's not a person of color? What are you are the only person of color? How do you respond? What do we need to do to address that? Anyone?
Susan, I think you should speak on this one.
Oh, she's setting me up. Well, it is very difficult because there are very many people who suffer from white fragility, and people take it very, very personally. And sometimes the relationships just have to, there's some things you can't fight, because if a person isn't willing to take a deep, heavy look at who we are and as a white person and how we grew up, we're already at an advantage because of this. So that's what we have to do. We have to keep pointing things out. And I do see, and I do comment, I make comments constantly about where are all the Black people in the room? Where are all the Black people on the boards? Where are all the Black employees? I mean, it's a problem. And, you know, that's why this group is so important, because we can educate people that, you know, it is a process. Like I had to rethink recruitment. I had to like remove barriers. And I intentionally look to hire Black and people of color employees. It's intentional. I work with diverse suppliers. If people don't align with my values, I'm not going to hire them. I purposefully hire Black-owned businesses. That's important to me because that's the way to encourage their development and their growth.
So Susan, you mentioned you call it out. Fred, so that's one thing. So again, this is not, I'm really asking our audience to engage. This is an opportunity for you to learn and to develop. So you heard one tip. If you walk into a room, a Zoom meeting or any other, and there are no people of color, Susan's recommendation, call it out. Ask the question. Fred?
Yeah, I didn't think I would start today by quoting Nancy Reagan, but she said, just say no. And I think that's what we got to do. I think I would suggest our white allies, if you walk in a room and there's no people of color, walk out of the room and tell them why you're walking out of the room. I'm not going to be, if I know there are people of color who should be in this room, they're not here, then I'm not going to stay here. So you got to vote with your feet. I feel the same way. I don't have that experience very often, but if I walk in a room and it's all men and there are women in the organization, around the organization, in the community, and no women are present, I need to say, hey, where are the women? Blah, 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 blah. Well, blah, 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 blah. When you finish that out, let me know, because I'm not going to stay for this meeting. If this is the third Reconstruction, then it's a time to be more militant. Now it's a time to take a stance, because you're going to have people have you cover your back now like never before when you take a stance. And so we got to walk out of meetings. I mean, we can chat a little bit if you need to, but we got to walk out of meetings when they're wrong, when they're not right, when they're not representing the values that we believe in.
Dr. Miller.
I think it's important to be intentional. So, you know, in the moment, I think Fred's solution is definitely a valiant one. But I think especially as Black men, we have to be intentional, and we have to do everything we can do to put ourselves and make ourselves part of that conversation and to get in the room. Yes, there are factors that at times can hold us back from being in the room. But so intentionally, just for example, in education, I feel it's really important to have the educational staff who mirror what the children look like. And, you know, if you look at research, children have a tendency to learn better and build relationships when they can identify with their teachers. Now, is that always likely? In most cases, no. We're in the capital region here, and the predominant amount of qualified candidates end up being white women, which is good because you can still teach them how to build relationships and still have results and success. But preferentially and very honest and open, I do look to hire minority candidates who are qualified and competent, because the kids deserve people who look like them in front of them. And for years, they haven't had that opportunity and that advantage. And so it becomes difficult, and a shame on, and I've had staff members that I've had to deal with that are the ones who are saying, oh, you know, that job's not going to go to a white person. And which is totally not true, because if a white person was more qualified, I would entertain that. But at the same time, yes, my first intent is going to be to do what's best for our children and to put people who look like them in front of them. So again, to get back to the question, I think it's making a space and bullying your way into the room. You know, you have to create the space for yourself, and you do that by your education, by your attitude, by your accomplishments. And it's sad that we almost have to run a race and be faster, be stronger, and present even as smarter to even have the same equal playing field to get into that room. And that's part of the problem.
Yolanda, maybe not so much even, I will say, we all see, I know Susan and I have in conversations frequently where we will see a photo snap of a Zoom, whatever that has occurred. And we'll say to each other, it's all white people, like these are all white people. But what I also want to say to white people, there was a point, you know, several years ago for me where I looked at my business and it's all white people. But I realized that's all my life was white people. So your network professionally is going to reflect your life that you live outside of work. So if you have a Zoom panel, a networking group, and you only associate with and have friendships with and cultivate professional contacts with white people, your professional network is going to be white. We all need to do the work, and it took me time to systematically, over time, start to seek out relationships with people that didn't look like me, that didn't sound like me, that didn't talk like me, that didn't dress like me. Paul, as you mentioned, that didn't have hair like me. I needed to start to become comfortable with being around, and my life is so much richer because of it, might I add. But I had to be intentional about creating that in my life. And now I'm starting to see that reflect in my business. And it wasn't even important for me for monetary reasons. It was important for me because if I am not having a business that shows diversity, then what does that say about me as a person and the way I'm living my life?
I appreciate what everybody is saying, and thank you for what you just said. We have to be strategic about this. So I've been on corporate boards. I was on the board of Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream. I've been on nonprofit boards. When I've been on a board and I'm the only, and I'm getting ready to leave or want to leave, I make sure that there's going to be another person of color, a Black person going to come there. And what I do is I resign my term before the end of my term. And what I say to the chair is, I'm ready to get off the board. I'm going to resign a year early so that you can appoint somebody to this board. And you have to appoint a Black person of color, a Black person. And so I've been very successful with having boards keep diversity on them by just resigning, but insisting in that resignation that they bring in somebody, because the chair of most organizations can bring in somebody if the term has not expired. And we know incumbents win elections. So what that does is says it puts the person in, it gives them some experience. When they run for the position, they're the incumbent, and usually they win. So it's that strategy stuff that we got to do. If we're on a board and we're going to leave the board, make sure the board is more diverse when we leave than when we joined.
So I want to thank you. One of the things we just spent some time talking about is relationships, personal relationships. As business individuals, we know that we put systems in place. We put systems in place for everything, because that's how organizations function. That's how we find success. What systematic issue or systemic issues do you see as most detrimental to inclusion in the capital region?
White fragility. I have seen this addressed publicly in public forums, and I have seen all of the white professionals rally to protect the white individual who is being pointed out as not upholding anti-racist work, as actually going in the opposite direction. And even if we're doing it unknowingly, in that very moment, it is imperative that we own it. We have to understand this doesn't make us bad people if we don't know. The point is, once you know, fix it. And we see this protective mechanism coming into place time and time again, where white people rally around other white people and silence the voice of Black men and women that are trying to tell us what we're all so receptive right now to Jonathan and Paul and Fred telling us on this forum. But when it goes down in real life in the capital region, that's not how it's happening. And we see it happening. We have to change it. We have to change our responses. We have to take this seriously. We have to start working to protect Black men and women. And Paul, you hire as many Black men and women as you want, because that's what white people have been doing for centuries, is hiring other white people. You know, it's okay. We need to really, as white people, rally together on the correct side of this. That's my passionate opinion.
And one thing I would like to say.
I'm sorry, Susan.
Can I just, there are so many instances of racism in this area. And my friends and people that I love are terrified to approach it because of the consequences that would happen to their businesses. And that's got to change. That has got to change. It is appalling. It is rampant. And it's time to change this system to get some people in power who will listen. Who will listen.
You know, I think that a huge issue that occurs is uh, the police and the community and the way that the community is currently policed. I believe that there are a lot of great officers within this community, but there are also a lot of officers who are spoiling it for the bunch. I believe that there are a lot of officers who are not currently trained to understand the Black and brown struggles, to not understand, and which creates a fear. That fear of the Black and brown community has created uneven arrest, has created uneven incarceration. It has created a fear that Black people can't drive down the street without being pulled over. You can't walk without thinking that a police officer might do something to you. And quite honestly, again, this is not a condemnation of police, but it is a condemnation of bad police. It's a condemnation of people not policing the community where they're from and not understanding the community that they're dealing with, and then dealing with situations without that level of understanding, and now creating these huge gaps that are hurting instead of helping. And really, the police are supposed to be there to help protect and serve. Yes, we do have a Black police chief who I believe has good intentions, but we have to get real about the majority of the officers who are on the force don't really have the level of understanding and training that they need to deal with the communities that they serve.
Yeah, you know, thinking about this, there's a story that Kimmy Joseph talks about during the Montgomery bus boycott. Dr. King said they did have diversity on the bus because there were Black people and white people on the bus. They did have inclusion on the bus because there were Black people and white people on the same bus. But they didn't have equity because those same Black people had to get up when white people got on the bus. Systems are to save yourself time, energy, and money. System. And when you think about it that way, and when you think about the words diversity, inclusion, and equity in the capital region, we are doing ourselves a disservice by excluding people of color, particularly Black people in the capital region. It is appalling that we would have such an area that has some of the greatest research institutions in the country, mostly led by people of color or Black people. Let's be honest, RPI, University of Albany, Union College, Hudson Valley, I can go down the list. But with that, we've got to get, and to Jeannine and Susan's point, get our story straight about what we are trying to achieve, right? Diversity is all well and good, but if you are treating people unequitably, you're doing no different than anyone else 50 years ago and Dr. Miller was talking about. So let's get it right this time. And let's, especially now we have the technology, people are not seeing race the way they used to because their networks are not just around the corner, they're across the world. So to Dr. Miller's point, all of our systems need to do a better job. And as an employee of the city of Albany, he is right. Even my own department that has a lot of Black people and people of color hired, we have to do a better job. But our focus needs to be on using the words and keeping the meaning of the words intentional. Back to Richard's point, intention. And equity is the intention. It's not affirmative action. It's not giving somebody a leg up as much as it is doing the right thing because you have noticed through your own personal intentions that you have excluded or marginalized the people that can contribute.
There were a couple of comments in the chat Q&A. One of them is talking about organizations that promote from within, and within's all white. So that's just broken. I mean, that's a nice luxury you had one day and a day going by, but you can't do that. We got to hold organizations more and more accountable for who they are and who's in the organization. And, you know, back to the 60s, we got to boycott those organizations that decide that being white is that. When I interact with our clients, I often say, You can stay all white. You have a right to go out of business and fail. But, businesses have that opportunity. So if you want to be that, be that. But if you're not going to be diverse, if you're not going to be inclusive, if you're not going to have equity, you are not going to be here long term. And organizations are going out of business every day. And we have more and more organizations, corporations saying to others, I expect you to have diversity. I'm not going to deal with as a supplier or as a vendor of any kind if you don't have diversity. And we got to keep that drumbeat going. The other thing I would say is somebody was talking about, how organizations kind of lump all the people of color together and you end up getting kind of lowest common denominator. And so, I hate to keep being hard about this, but the time for settling for crumbs is gone. It's past. We got to settle. We got to get what's going to take us to the next level, not something that's just going to maintain where we are or have us slip back. So it's demanding in our organizations what they need to do. It's having people of color need to come together. All our clients, we like to see people of color come together, and we like the separate identity groups to exist also. So we want a Latino group. We want a Black group. We want people with this difference or that difference so that people can have connection. People can have community. What organizations have done historically is spread people out that are different. And then you're lonely, isolated, and most of the time don't perform as well. And so, we have a couple examples of when a Black person was like the only person in their department, and nobody invited them out to lunch. Nobody invited them out to lunch. So they start bringing their lunch and sitting at their desks. And then their colleagues felt like, oh, that person doesn't want to go out to lunch. They like sitting at their desk. It was a year before they went out to lunch with a colleague. Unacceptable. Just absolutely craziness in our organizations. And we can do something about it, which is drawing the line and saying, this has to stop.
Thank you. One of the questions in the Q&A is, what is your take and opinion on organizations that want to treat diversity as a catch-all? They don't want to meet each group where they are. They want one solution to address all the ways people are different. And I think, Fred, you talked about that a little bit, about affinity groups and the need for those. So I'll go to another question. It says,
I would just say there are lots of options about where you spend your time and what businesses you support and what products you buy. And it's not like, I was in Russia for a while when you went in the grocery store and there were like only 3 products on the shelves. This is not our reality. We have choice. We have to exercise those choices in the spirit of creating a better society.
I'll ask another question from the Q&A. Understanding the opposing forces of the prevalence of white fragility, as well as the science behind the harmfulness of shaming and creating better allies, what suggestions do you have to help create accountability, not shame, which encourages growth and opportunities for better allies in the future?
Well, one, tune into the B.R.I.D.G.E network routinely. Make this a part of your monthly schedules. That's what I would say. The other thing too is, and all of our panelists touched on this, look at your own network. In our summer youth employment program, we tell our young people, if you look at your 3 closest friends, that is a clear representation of who you are. And a lot of times they're the same person. And so if you look in your organization, particularly in your HR department, and your hiring director only has these group of people that they hire, you need to address that. And at the same time, some of that may start at the board level, some of that may start at the leadership level. But when you're working on a muscle, you're focused on that muscle. And if you realize that you have a problem with hiring qualified Black people, you need to find a way to hire qualified Black people. I was a recipient of the EOP award to get into graduate school. I earned my way to get there by my grades. But had it not been for the great work of Arthur Eve, I would not have been able to get into graduate school. That didn't make it racist that I got into it. It was an opportunity to address the fact that there were young Black people, particularly those who had a financial, a situation that was hindering them from getting to that next level, and they had the grades, and that was created. So create opportunities like, you see other companies do, and then hire within where it needs to be, because there are no excuses anymore for not having a diverse background or an inclusive or equitable platform in your organization.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Paul.
No, I was just going to say, I believe it's detrimentally important to learn and understand your privilege. And that's where the work needs to go, is understanding, being open to, and not being shut off and walking around and just saying, I don't see color. That is one of the most offensive statements, because as Black people, we want to be seen. We haven't been seen. And so now being seen is important, and seeing that there are differences, seeing that you do have privilege, and understanding and learning. And I think Jeannine just put it so well earlier, that she spent time learning and investing time into understanding her privilege and how she can utilize her privilege to be an advocate. And I think the more people spend time doing that, the better and more opportunities they will have to become advocates.
And Yolanda, could I piggyback on what Paul just said very quickly? I become very concerned when I hear somebody say, and without shame. Let me tell you, as a white person, you are going to feel, and you should feel, and we all should feel, a lot of shame. Shame is part of our healing process. Shame, discomfort could be another word for shame. Yes, expect to feel shame, because our history is loaded with horrific things that we have done. And it is our history. We have to learn it. We have to own it. And we have to be willing to use that as part of our reparative process to work towards social justice. It is a part of our work.
And what I wanted to piggyback on also is that people use the word like, oh, I've been shamed, when it's not. That's not the intention. That's the white fragility speaking. Like, it's like, oh, you hurt my feelings. How can you say that? Because it's not about you. It's not about you. It's about your behavior. It's about how you said what you said. It's about learning the nuances about what's appropriate and what's not. And when someone does that, I know someone who professes like, yeah, I'm working, I'm an ally on this. If you don't know the basic tenets, like you don't interrupt, you shut up and you listen. And it's you don't center yourself, because it's not about us. It's about the person we're talking about. It's not about us white people. It's just not. There's no shame. I know in my life, people have said I have shamed them, and I truly have not. And I have been constructive. I have been very consistent. I also, every day, like, there is not one day that goes by that I don't do work, either reading something or writing something. Journaling is so imperative because it's out there every day. And because of my ongoing network, which I have some very, very wonderful, close women friends that are, I feel, part of the tribe. They have taught me so much. And now I see, I can't not see it. I can't, and I won't. And if someone doesn't like me or approve of me or appreciate me, that's okay. I'm privileged enough, and I'm aware of it, that I can risk that. And I will risk that, because I am devoted and dedicated. That's all.
I'm going to come back to that, Susan, about your work as an individual. And I'll ask this question. There's a workshop that I perform, and during the workshop, we talk about critical self-reflection. And I'll ask this question to the panelists. How do you practice critical self-reflection, particularly around the work of social justice, equity, inclusion? What does that look like for you? I know you talked about journaling, and shame is a part of the process, but each and every one of us has to do some of this internal work to show up every day to fight injustice. Can one or two of you share your experience and what your personal work looks like when you're doing that critical self-reflection?
I'll jump in. It's the hardest and the easiest work to do. For me, the work occurs every 2.5 hours or so when I have to take my dog out. And I have time away from this computer screen. I have time away from the phone. I have uninterrupted time where I have 2 pieces of business, one that the dog has to do and one that I have to do. And that is think. I have to think on the things that I've said, the intent and the subsequent impact of words and decisions that I have made along the way, and then also develop the strategy to improve and to get to a point where true healing and true reparations, if you will, can be made. I think to a very specific example in my career when I hired a very intelligent, very inexperienced Black woman and did not give her anything she needed to succeed, and wound up terminating her because she wasn't meeting performance metrics. And she was harmed. That experience harmed her. I was part of her harm. And this is something that lives with me every day. So the strategies get put in place to address the harm and to eventually hope that I can become part of the healing as opposed to part of the hurting.
Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else?
I spend a lot of time reflecting on all of the things that were taught to me. Where did I learn them? What made me think they were true? And I'm going to give one solid example because I think it might help people to have a reference. I was listening to a podcast one day, and it was a story about a group of Black men. I believe this was in Chicago, and a fitness coach came in and got them to start a crew team. It's an amazing podcast. It's an amazing story. But the thing that stood out with me, there were several, but the one that I'll mention right now was he mentioned how none of them knew how to swim because they had never had access to pools. They had never had access to swimming lessons. And so this made them fearful of actually getting in the water to be part of this crew team. And suddenly it made me realize I had always heard the stereotype that Black people can't swim. And suddenly now I understood historically where that came from. So when we take the time to dive into these stories and these articles and to learn about history, it starts to reveal to us as white people where all of this prejudice, racism, systemic racism comes from, so we can start to discard it and then understand how to address it with other white people. If I don't do the work in myself, I can't then reach out and expect to be able to do the work with other white people. So we have to start with ourselves. And that requires, as Richard meant, this is a daily practice for me. It is a practice. A lot of you practice yoga and meditation. I practice anti-racism. I listen in my car. This morning on my way here, I've been immersing myself in bell hooks. I was listening to another lecture with bell hooks this morning in my car on the way here, on the way home. She's referencing Martin Luther King, and I learn things every day, and then it sends me further down the rabbit hole because now I have more to learn. It's infinite abundance.
It is.
There's a lot.
Jeannine, I'll just add very briefly. Another reason why African Americans and swimming is an issue is because of segregation, access, and when African Americans did engage in swimming activities, some of their pools were overtreated and they had physical harm because white people would, pour extra bleach or extra chlorine in the water and make it harmful for Blacks to swim. So there's so much more to why there's exposure to various activities. And I want to tie this to two questions that we have. One, how can we get more mentors for both youth and adults from businesses that can expose individuals to outside experiences? And I want to tie that into another question we had earlier that was in the chat. How do you develop a more diverse board? So if we could talk a little bit about exposure to various experiences for professional development, which then can lead to board service. Anyone would like to take that?
just to back up for a second, through some of my work with the SCLC, I got an opportunity to meet the gentleman who, there was a huge case in Florida back, I think it was in the 60s, where the Black people were protesting and they were going to the pools and they were going swimming, and so they protested by being in the pool. So I guess the hotel manager, the first day, he decided to pour acid in the pool to get the people out of the pool. And luckily, the chemicals mixed to a point where it didn't do any harm or damage. With the chlorine, I guess it offset it. People who are a lot smarter than me would know why. And then second day, the Black people came back again. And when they came back, the gentleman put alligators in the pool. And so the gentleman who was actually in there, I was able to actually have a conversation with him and get his thoughts and feelings. Jeannine, when you say those things, these are real scenarios. These are real fears. These are real ideations that have occurred. Transitioning into answering your question, I can share one opportunity just even here at through Green Tech. We have an internship program where we look to partner with as many businesses as potentially possible. So our goal is to get every one of our senior students linked up with a business opportunity of their interest, paid or unpaid. It's always good if it is paid, but if it's unpaid, that is helpful as well, to create these internship opportunities to mentor, to train kids, to give them career and job readiness. So that is one opportunity that I would like to put out there, that if people did have business opportunities and would like to reach out to us, that they can contact me, and I'd love to link them to the appropriate people so we can add them to our partner list.
Yeah, to Dr. Miller's point, the same in the city of Albany, and I know Rensselaer County and Schenectady County also have a summer youth employment program. But for mentors, understand that if you are going to mentor a young person or mentor a person, please make it a commitment. You could do a lot of harm by just showing up one time, right? And having one conversation and then not coming back. You have to commit. And, Greg Owens, who was a mentor to me, who still is a mentor to me, when he taught about mentorship, he said you need to have committed at least 1 hour every month, right? And when you do that, you're connecting with that young person over time. You're going to build trust. When you're asking for a mentor, especially of a young person today, you don't know what their family situation came from. You have to commit to that person and build that trust. And so through our program, you can build that trust over 5 weeks, and then hopefully as you move on. But to just everything that everyone was saying about mentors, it's important that you realize that you need a village of people. You need a network to not only help you understand your own lived experiences and how they, make their way into your own mindset and your daily practice, but at the same time, you need to unlearn some things. And I'm fortunate where I had some white mentors and I had Black mentors to help me unlearn some unhealthy and unrealistic problems that I was putting on myself as a Black man, right? Where you don't think you're good enough to win the 40 under 40 or something like that. That was real. For me, when I won the 40 under 40, I did not have the confidence to say that, I've done some work to earn this. I thought it was that I need a Black man in there. And luckily, myself, DeQuetta, and Carmen, we all won, and we made a commitment and we worked with Cindy to say, we are going to nominate more Black people. So when you have the opportunity to sit at the table, you can be a mentor. You don't have to necessarily meet them, but you can bring people along with you as a trailblazer.
Jonathan, we have a question based on the points that you're kind of making. How can HR decision makers push back on the overused notion that there aren't diverse candidates out there? And we're going to talk about from HR to people who could qualify for awards, the 40 under 40, 40 under 40, or the Capital Region Women of Excellence Awards, various community awards that we have now. When they're looking to fill positions, how can we address that? Anyone?
You might just start by laughing at them. How ridiculous is that? Yeah. I mean, where are you, on the moon? I mean, there are people here, there are people who have talents and have skills. And if if you're not finding them, it's because you're not looking, or you're not looking hard enough. So, right. I mean, we can't find any for an answer. Nobody wants, one of our clients cleans out machines. And women don't want to clean out machines. That's why it's all men. There are women who don't mind cleaning out machines. I mean, we got to just call the crap, call the nonsense that's historical, or they're making it up in the moment. If they're serious and they want to do it, you can find people who want to do every job, and you can find diverse people who want to do every job. No group has a corner on only people from this group want to do that job. Not real.
Stop judging a book by its cover too. You know, you may see a name, my name is Jonathan Paul Jones. So I grew up with a lot of Daquans and Tyrones, and they're equally intelligent. But my name, fortunate or unfortunately, got me into some places that other people didn't. And you can't judge a book by its cover. You don't know what someone has to offer. And at the same time, again, you're cutting yourself short if you can just think that this person can only do this job. That's ridiculous. Especially in Black people, because when you look back, everyone uses a refrigerator and stops at the traffic light. That was created by Black people. And those were during times where it was a lot more in-your-face oppression than we exhibit now. So I agree with Mr. Miller. That's an old time, and we need to get beyond that, especially here.
And it goes back to, I think, things that we shared earlier, expanding your network. If you're 3 people who you look to when you're looking for recommendations all look like you, dress like you, talk like you, then you're not going to get diversity. You need to expand your network. We have 10 minutes left for our conversation, and there are so many great questions that are in the Q&A and that are in the chat. And I hope that the Bridge Network they'll capture these questions and they'll answer them in some other forums and opportunities. I do want to conclude with giving our panel one opportunity to share any information before they wrap up. And I was going to pose it as a question, but I'm going to leave that to you. Please keep it short. One thing that you want to share with our audience. And I'll start with Commissioner Jones.
One thing I want to share with our audience is that Black people are not monolithic. There's a broad experience of the Black experience, whether that be a Caribbean experience, an African-American experience. And so, again, don't judge a book by its cover. And the last thing is, if you are white and you have begun to unlearn some of the practices that have put you in the supremacy category, realize that you need to move from being an ally to an advancer. Use your privilege, use your white privilege to advance the things that you see are not happening in the marginalized civilizations, especially in the Black experience. So again, I just think that this conversation is valuable, but at the same time, it's now time to do the work. And the best thing about it is we have an opportunity this year, particularly in the day and the time we're in, to execute right here.
Thank you. Susan, thank you, Commissioner Jones, for joining us today. Susan.
The main aspect I think that's important is the continued self-reflection and to look at how we grew up and how we learned. We weren't taught history. We weren't taught the accurate history of African Americans and the slavery and how they were brought here. And I didn't know that. And that's so important. It's so very important. I tell people, read White Fragility by Dr. Robin DiAngelo, or read Waking Up White by Debbie Irving, and watch 13th. It's a Netflix movie that explains a lot, and it's extremely educational for those who have not seen it. 13th.
Thank you, Susan, for joining us today. Richard.
I just want to finish with a quote by one of my favorite human beings that ever lived, Audre Lorde. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. I encourage everyone to think about what tools you are using and what systems you're upholding, and go all the way back and find different tools, because we need them now more than ever.
Thank you for joining us, Richard. Dr. Miller.
I think I'm going to hit a hot button here and say that equity in education needs to happen within the capital region. Charter schools were started by a group of white men. They were started by a group of white men who said that they can do education better than anybody else, and that they were going to shut down the public schools, which is a bunch of nonsense. They created such a rift and such a gap that it's created a hatred for between the two organizations. And they did this on the backs of Black children, created these schools, and then walked away from the organization after there was no more money to be made. And so when I say all of this, the charter schools and public schools, we're not enemies. And there needs to be the political nonsense behind it all is just hurting kids. It's hurting children. So we need to break those barriers down. We need to change our perceptions, and we need to just find a way to incorporate and have good schools, not public versus charter, not the private. It's about good schools and doing what's right for kids. And we got to close the achievement gaps, and we got to do that together.
Thank you, Dr. Miller, for joining us today. Jeannine.
I would just like to, I know when we prepped for this, we really touched on the importance, Richard and I and Susan, if you're looking to start this work and you don't know where to start, the best thing you can do is just start to be a witness. Listen to Black women and men. Secondly, and most importantly, believe Black women and men. Go into these learning experiences with the mindset that you are going to believe what is being told to you. And then if there are things you don't know or don't understand, do not put the labor on Black men and women to teach this to us. It is our labor to then go, Google has everything. It's amazing. You can just put a phrase in Google and it will give you a plethora of articles you can read to learn about maybe if there are terms that are used that that we don't understand. Thirdly, it's okay to make mistakes. This is not a perfect practice. We are going to fail. We are going to make mistakes, but utmost try as best as we can to not do harm. So that is our goal. So I just encourage people, be brave. Please join us. We need more people being vocal and being active in this work towards equality and equity for everyone.
Thank you so much, Jeannine, for joining us. And we're going to close and have the final word by Mr. Fred Miller.
Oh, thank you. Well, one, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank everybody who's joined us today. I want to thank this wonderful, wonderful panel. And Yolanda, I really want to thank you for your leadership and your partnership and your love that you showed in this process. So thank you. The last thing I would say is this change is real. This is real. This is like, it's not going to go away. It's going to happen. And when your ancestors 20 years ago go to ancestry.com and look up you and look up where you were during this time of this incredible transformational change, what do you want them to read about you and what you did during these days of transformation? You have a chance to create your history right now.
Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, Walter and Miriam, for giving me the privilege to moderate your inaugural event. I'll turn it back over to Walter.
Well, let me just say that my heart is full. And ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed is the Bridge Network. I want to thank everybody for participating today. And Yolanda, thank you for moderating. You were amazing. I appreciate that. I feel like we've gotten off to an honest and a great start. And I just want to thank the panelists for joining us today for our initial event. I want to thank the members of the Bridge Network's founding and advisory committee. We didn't do this by ourselves. We brought in a full committee to advise us on how this should be. And this was the first of many events. This will only be successful if we stand united. And I'm energized and encouraged that we've gotten off the ground to a good start. Before I end, I would like to bring Miriam in to share some final thoughts and send us off.
Thank you, Walter. I think I can only walk away with just a sense of hope and inspiration. The comments in the comments today are just amazing. The panelists did an amazing job of, being open and honest and giving us a lot of things to think about. So I am thrilled with today's event. And I just want to echo everyone and everyone's thanks to our panelists, our moderator, our audience, and the Bridge Network team. Our goal is to take the momentum of today and continue to turn it into action. So we invite you to do the following. Please visit the Bridge Network website. It's 518bridge.com. So www.518bridge.com. You can learn more about who we are and what we stand for there. You can fill out a form to volunteer and be a part of this initiative. Please take a look at our pledge that is also listed on the website. That pledge is you or your organization filling it out and saying, I do want to be part of the change. I do want to make a difference in our community, in our society for equity, inclusion, and diversity. You can also review our list of resources, programs, and services that support diversity, equity, and inclusion. Please let us know of any additional resources that should be added. We want to build out an enormous list of resources, things to read, organizations that are out there doing this good work, and we appreciate your help in finding and making those people and resources and tools that are available. And finally, please share our programs and services for those who are in need of them. Again, the website is www.518bridge.com. In addition, we are already beginning to plan our second virtual event. It will be held on March 2nd, and we'll keep you posted on the details and get information out as soon as possible. Finally, we hope that you'll invite your colleagues, friends, and family, anyone that could benefit from being a part of the Bridge Network, to learn more and join us in the future. We are a welcoming and inclusive group, and the more the merrier. So let me close out again by thanking all of you for being with us today. Have a great afternoon, and we look forward to seeing and hearing from you again soon. Thank you.